Hi everyone, I'm Charlotte from Charlotte and Patterns, and today I'm going to talk you through the one tricky step when sewing my Clove vest pattern. So this is the Clove vest. It's a vest designed for medium weight knits. It has a neckband which finishes in a V-neck, and it has a hemband at the bottom with a split hem. So the Clove vest is a nice simple pattern. It's quite a quick sew, but there's one step that you might not have tackled before that I'm just going to talk you through today, and that is this V-neck, the base of the V-neck. So I'm going to talk you through how to make this overlapping band, neckband here, and then how to get a really nice finish at the base of the V, so you get nice flat base and nice clean corners. So that's what we're going to go through now. If you're following along with the instructions, we're now on step 4. So we have the vest front and back, and they've been joined together at the shoulder seam. If you're sewing the D-cut version, you'll also have sewn the bust darts. And if you're using a fabric that's prone to stretch a lot, you should also have stay stitched the neckline and also the armholes. So the next step is to prepare the neckband and attach it to the neckline of the vest. But before we do that, it's really important to mark the circular notches, which you'll find on the pattern. So there are 2 of those on the neckline of the vest, and you can see I've marked them here in tailor's tacks, and it's either side of the base of the V-neck. And they would just make attaching the neckband much easier. And then you also have circular notches on the neckband piece itself. So either end, you have these 3 notches, which again I've marked in tailor's tacks. So there's one in the centre and there's one either side. And again, it will just make attaching the neckband so much easier and more precise if you have those. Okay, so we're now going to prepare the neckband so that then we can attach it to the bodice. So the first step is to bring the neckband together, fold it lengthways, wrong sides together. So I'll just work through that. You're only going to be working with the ends at the moment, but it's probably easier to pin it along its full length at this stage. Just to make it easier to work with. When you are bringing the neckband together, there are 3 notches along the length of the neckband. If I find one of mine, I've just snipped into mine. So as you are bringing it together, you can use those notches to make sure that you're keeping it aligned properly. So I'm just going to pin along the length of my neckband, and then I'll show you the next step. Okay, so I have pinned along the length of my neckband. You can see, so you've brought the 2 raw edges of the neckband together, and those 2 raw edges are ultimately going to be attached to the neckline of the vest. So if I fold it like this, you can see that is basically how it will look when it's attached to the vest. That's the shape you're going to have. So that raw edge is going to attach, and then this folded side will be against your neckline. So in the instructions, it talks about a left over right overlap, and all that is which side of the band, so the left side or the right side, is uppermost when you're wearing it, and it's completely irrelevant which way around it ends up. But just for simplicity, the instructions are based on a left over right overlap. So that just looks like that when it's worn. You've got the left side over the right. So what we're going to do now, before we start attaching this neckband to the vest itself, is we're just going to base these 2 short edges together in the right place, so that it's easier basically to attach, and so that these stay together correctly and they don't wiggle around or end up too far overlapped, like that for example. So the way to do this is to use these circular notches that we marked earlier. You will be able to see that now that you've folded this together, one of those circular notches has ended up on the fold. Okay, so I think you can see that now. So one of your circular notches has basically ended up on the fold itself. And then the other two circular notches are over towards the corner. And those are basically on top of each other, they've ended up. And when you overlap, you want to overlap the circular notch that's ended up on the fold over the two circular notches that are on the side near the edge of the other piece. So the two bottom edges are aligned, and this circular notch on my uppermost piece that's on the fold just sits on top basically of the two circular notches that are near the corner of the piece below. And all that means really is that once they're overlapped, you still have some seam allowance at the side. So you're not overlapping them completely edge to edge. You're overlapping them based on those notches. So that notch is meeting, that notch on the fold is meeting that one. And if I flip it over, you should get exactly the same on the other side. So on the fold, that's over those two circular notches in the corner. And then when you're happy that that's the case, just pin that together in place. And then we'll just baste that together on the sewing machine as a next step, so that it can't move around while we're working through the steps of attaching the neckband to the vest. The neckband has now been basted, so you can see there's a row of basting stitch through the short edge of the neckband. I've used a white thread, so use a contrast thread so that you can identify it and remove it easily later. I just used a long stitch length for that, so I used a length of 4 on my sewing machine and a straight stitch because it's just about holding that together in the right place. And I sewed that along the seam allowance, so the 1 centre seam allowance for the pattern. So at that point, so you should be sewing through 4 layers of fabric. So it's both sides of the neckband folded, so it's 4 layers. And you shouldn't have, if you're using a kind of light or medium weight knit, like the pattern recommends, you shouldn't have too much of an issue sewing through those 4 layers. And then we will ultimately have 5 as we attach it to the vest. So, the other thing to say as well, so obviously the neckband, as you're basting it and then as we carry on and sew it, just make sure that you don't twist it. So you can see that that's staying nice and straight, and that the raw edges are staying along the outside. So the next step now is to attach this neckband to the vest, and we're going to attach it initially only along this bottom seam here, and then we'll do the rest of the neck as a separate step. So to attach this neckband to the vest, so you're aligning the flat edges of your neckband with the flat edge at the base of the neck. So you're making sure that those 5 layers, the 4 layers of the neckband and the 1 layer at the base of the vest are aligned. And then the really key thing here is that you're referring back to those circular notches. So on your neckband, you should have brought your circular notches together at either side. So you'll have 3 on top of each other there, and you'll have 3 on top of each other there. And obviously you've got 2 on the V-neck of your vest. So you're aligning that flat seam and you're aligning those circular notches either side. And you'll obviously have then some overlap of the neckband either side of those. So align those notches, and to make sure you're doing that, you can obviously pin through the neckband notches into the vest notch and pin that in place, and do that both sides. If you find this part particularly tricky, you can always, of course, do more than just pin, so you could baste through the notches in those points, or you could even hand baste across this whole seam. So I'm going to go away and sew that on the machine, But the really important thing here is that you only sew between those circular notches. So you can obviously see the notches on the neckband side, or if you flip it over, you'll see them on the vest side. But only sew between the notch this side and the notch that side. So you're basically leaving a small area at either side of the neckband unsewn. So we've attached our neckband to the base of the V-neck. So I've done mine in a green thread just to make it easy to see, but of course you'll be using a matching thread because this is a permanent row of stitches. So it's sewn along the 1 centimetre seam allowance, and it's only between the notches as we talked about earlier. So you can see on mine there is still a loose section either side of the neckband. And if I show it you like that, you can see that the ultimate shape of the vest is starting to become apparent, or the shape of the neckline. So that's attached neatly there now. So the next step is a slightly scary one because we have to snip into the vest at the corners of the V-neck, and that is so we can then bend the neckband or bend the neckline around this corner here, the pointed corner, and then attach the rest of the neckband. And if you don't snip into the vest here, it's very difficult to get a neat shape here because you can't bend the vest neatly around those edges. So in terms of the snipping, it's easiest to do that from the wrong side. When snipping into the vest, so turn it to the wrong side because it's just clearer view of where we want to cut from this side, there's less going on. And what we want to cut is the vest itself, you don't need to cut the neckband. So the area we're going to cut into is at the very base of the V-neck. And what you're going to do, I've already done it on this side, but not this one yet, is we're going to cut into the diagonally into the corner of the V-neck. So you can see I've done it there, and so it'll be there on this side, and you're going to cut a straight line, a diagonal line into that corner. You're going to get close to your original marker for your circular notch, but you're going to make sure you do not snip through your stitching line at the base. So as I've done there, you're going to snip into that corner, a little diagonal snip, so that your vest then will fold round the neckband. When you're doing that, you only need to cut through the vest layer. You don't need to cut through the neckband layer underneath. We're approaching the end of attaching our neckband to the vest. So this is kind of the major step now, where we're going to attach all the rest of the neckband along the rest of the neckline. So we are going to attach the right sides together. So your uppermost side of the neckband is your right side, obviously with the right side of your vest. And we're going to align the 3 raw edges. So 2 raw edges of the neckband and 1 of the vest. And then we're going to sew those together with a 1 centimetre seam allowance. As you're doing this, as you're pinning them and then sewing them, make sure of course that you don't twist the neckband. So you want that raw edge all the way along attached, and also don't forget you have 3 notches along the length of your neckband, so 2 of those will align with your shoulder seams, and then 1 will align with the centre back of the vest, which obviously you can find by just holding it together at the shoulder seams, and then if you fold, you'll be able to find the centre back. Mark it with a pin, and then you can align that with a notch on your neckband. So I'm just going to work round and pin my neckband the whole length. The tricky bit, obviously, most of that's fairly straightforward. The bit that you might find tricky is right here at the base of the neck. So this is the hardest bit. But now that you've snipped into your vest at the V-neck, it gives you that kind of angle or that flexibility, so you can fold the vest round and attach it to the neckband. So you can see, and it is just a case when you're doing this of making sure you don't get any folds while you're attaching it, because they will cause a lump in your neckband. But yeah, so you basically just at that end want to make use of that little snip to fold your vest round, and then pin it along the side of the neckband. And as I say, you're just going to work all the way along, and then I'll come back with a fully pinned neckband to show you. The neckband is now pinned but not yet sewn all the way along the length of the neckline. This is what it'll look like from the wrong side at the moment. So you can see it's right sides together, pinned all the way round. And if I flip it over to the right side, it's even more obvious that it's looking correct. And you can basically see how it'll look in a moment once we've sewn it. So you're getting the kind of neat neckband all the way around, it's not being twisted, and you're starting to see that V-neck appearing as well. So we're going to sew along that raw seam, that seam that we've just pinned, with a 1 centimetre seam allowance. Obviously most of that seam is going to be really easy or really straightforward. The only complicated bit are these two corners here. And when we're sewing, so you won't be re-sewing the base, so that's already done. You're sewing this unsewn edge, and you're sewing it from one notch, one side, one corner, round to that other corner, that other notch. So you just need to be careful, and there isn't anything scientific about this really, it's just kind of taking care. And obviously if it doesn't work first time, it's unpicking and trying again basically. But when you start off at the one side and then when you reach the other one, you're just needing to take care, as we said before. So you're basically trying to sew as close as possible from where your previous seam at the bottom finished, and then follow along the side, obviously all the way around. You're just trying to make sure you don't get any folds of fabric trapped, and you can kind of move those out of the way as well. Obviously you can use your snip corner to adjust as well if you need to. You will get a small section at the bottom, it's maybe not that easy to see, where there's basically no vest, so that's where I snipped and I folded it round. So that corner, there's no, where you can see the neckband, there's no vest. But that's irrelevant because we're going to start sewing from our notch, from the base of our previous line of stitches, and we're going to sew all the way around and just take care on these corners as we've said. I've been to the machine and I've machine sewed along the full length of the neckband where we pinned. So mine is in green thread, so you might be able to see. Obviously you'll be using a matching thread, and as mentioned you are sewing right from the edges of where your previous row of stitching at the base finished, and you're going all the way round. If I bring that a bit closer, hopefully you'll be able to see. And if I flip the vest to the other side, the really important thing to do at this stage is to check you are happy with your neckband before you do anything else. So this is how my neckband is looking at the moment. And so I can check, am I happy with how the base of that V-neck is looking? So there is a little bit of kind of pulling because I need to address all of this seam allowance, but I can see that actually I've got some nice clean points there. Obviously that the neckband's not twisted all the way around, you know, it stayed straight, and that I'm happy with that. So check that. If you aren't happy here, so if you've got not a clean sharp shape at the base of the V here, or if you've accidentally ended up with a hole, if you haven't sewn right down to that previous row of stitching, for example, or any other issues, this is your opportunity to address them before you finish the neckband and then go on to finish the rest of the vest. So obviously you can unpick, if most of the neckband is fine but you're just not happy with this section, then you can leave the rest of the neck as long as you've got enough ease to play with, and you can just unpick these sections and work back through those. Ideally you won't remove your little marking threads until you're completely happy. Once you're happy with your neckband, you obviously then just need to finish this seam allowance, because you've got a lot of bulk here on the inside, and that will give you a bit of pulling. So you can see on mine at the moment there's a bit of pulling, and that's mainly because of this seam allowance here. So at this stage, obviously you can finish this however you want. There are recommendations in the pattern instructions, but it's up to you. You can overlock, you can obviously use mock overlock, or just thin this down or pink it. But what you really want to do is make sure you chop off the edge at these two corners, obviously outside of your stitching line, so just the seam allowance. So just chop across there and across there, so that you haven't got this excess seam allowance pulling on the corners. So you'll finish that seam allowance, and then the only final step, which is optional with the neckband, is that you can then top stitch around the outside edge. So it's on the vest side, not the neckband side. So you can top stitch, and this is in the instructions as well, a row of top stitching around, all the way around and across the bottom, and obviously catch the seam allowance, the remaining seam allowance in that, and that's mainly just for effect and also to hold it nice and flat, but that's completely optional. So that is how you attach the neckband of the Clove vest, and then you'll then carry on through the instructions to attach the side seams facing at the armholes and the hem.